Welcome to the Conlang / language and fiction panel. I'll introduce myself to start with. My name is Sarah. I will be your moderator this evening. You sit automatically. It doesn't really look like it, but you're sitting. We are joined by 4 lovely panelists, although it looks like Kat might be having some internet issues because I have been seeing her flicker in and out. So we have Eljay, we have Kat, we have Marcus, and we have Jenny. And they have all agreed to talk to us about constructed languages in general and languages in fiction in general and the crossover area between those things. Audience question about who is giving the panel. I don't know if that was sent to me before I just gave that answer or not. We're all very good at computers. Everything is fine. So a little bit more introduction while hopefully Kat gets things figured out. Kat Valente is most famous for her recent performance as Horatia Hornbreaker. There you go. If you missed the Baron Munchausen storytelling panel a couple hours ago, keep an eye on the CrossingsCon YouTube channel. It will be up. It will be great. There was cannibalism and some snakes, I think. Par for the course.
That sounds about right. I wasn't there, but it's Baron Munchausen. I assume there was. There's always cannibalism.
And Marcus Smiles is a Conlang enthusiast, has created, I think, several languages of his own, including one called Sia. Is that how you pronounce it?
Shia.
Which she is going to talk a little bit about today. Eljay is a LARP enthusiast and Conlang dabbler. I should say, obviously, in addition to being Horatia Hornbreaker, Kat Valente is also obviously a writer, which is why she's here. I sort of skipped over that because I was excited about the cannibalism.
Aren't we all?
It's fine. And then Jenny is sort of sitting in as the lay person, as it were. She is herself a big Tolkien enthusiast and linguistic nerd in general, but also kind of giving us I haven't actually done any of this myself. I just spend a lot of time looking at stuff other people do, which is a really valuable, perspective. Valuable perspective to bring to this. So, I did not see. Well, I gathered a few audience questions that were submitted ahead of time. If I missed a question that you submitted, and we have extra time, we'll see if we have time for more questions at the end. But I sort of suspect that asking people who like words to talk about words is going to take a while. So. Yeah. Don't hold your breath. But in the meantime, I'm going to get started. So, let's just go, left to right as you guys are seated. So that would be Eljay, Kat, Marcus, and then Jenny. Like, in a couple sentences, what is your experiences with constructed languages and language in fiction?
Sure. I'm also a Tolkien enthusiast from way back, but more recently, I've been LARPing for 22 years now, and writing them for about 10 of those years. and just made my loves intersect. I also like making props, and so a lot of visual languages and alphabets have come out of that. So many of my props and constructs. I have a giant spreadsheet of other people's constructed languages that I stole from Reddit, and I gleefully steal people's ideas and put them in my games, roughly. So I've constructed one language on my own that's still not complete, and yeah, that's about it.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a Tolkien enthusiast from way back. I think we can all probably say that. But I'm also a classicist. So ancient Greek and Latin are my bag, baby. So the thing about an ancient language and studying it to the extent that you do to get an entire degree in it, I almost said entire ass degree, but I think that the hyphen cannot be correctly placed verbally. Is that when you know sort of on an intimate level how these languages that form the building blocks, although the connection between Latin and Greek and English is roundabout and tangled. When you know how those are put together, you can start to see the patterns in all these other languages that either take vocabulary or structure from them. And if you are a science fiction fantasy person, as I always was, it's not even a jump to the left. Like it's just a cha-cha real smooth into.
Oh no!
No. That was a very
Cha-cha.
smooth cha-cha.
So I was going to say cha-cha right off the stage. Oh my goodness.
Oh boy.
All right.
It's okay. Well, I don't know how soon she'll come back, but I will chime in and say that I have a great fondness for Kat and her classics background. I'm a Latin teacher during my day job, and also spend a lot of time thinking about Latin and how much more Greek I ought to know than I do. But and I feel
jumped out there. So I've never done an entire Conlang myself, but I can fake it with the best of them, and the tools that you have, having studied ancient languages, and I also went to grad school for medieval studies, so I can add a lot of halfway between the ancient and the modern languages to that. If you can do that, then it is very easy to come up with an extremely plausible sounding magic spell and or ancient prophecy and or alien tongue, whichever you would prefer.
excellent. Marcus, how about you?
Okay, well, as it happens, my degrees are in classics and medieval history. I fell in love with. I got the conlanging bug from Tolkien.
Of course.
I was reviewing my Tangwa earlier today. So basic. What was the question again?
Tell us about your experience with conlangs.
All right, so I read Lord of the Rings when I was in 6th grade and fell in love with the appendices and the. So and then I thought, well, I should make my own. So I made a terrible one, and then I made a better one, and I've been improving ever since.
Nice.
I love cases, so my language.
Yeah. Inflected language in the house.
So anyhow, so I got my case. My language has either 20 or 18 cases, depending on which how you count.
Mm-hmm.
So that's no, and so yes. So basically, that's I'm a big Latin and Greek nerd, but I like creating stuff, so I just yeah. And I got my whole basic. This is the basic syllabary. So you know, I love doing this. Yeah. So that's, and thank God for the internet, because otherwise I would have never met anybody who actually also did this.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah, I feel that.
All right, Jenny, what would you like to add?
First of all, hi, bud. I'm on the phone.
I'm not knowing you.
I know. Thank you. He likes to come say hi. So yet another Tolkien enthusiast. I first read The Lord of the Rings when I was 8 and never looked back. I tried to learn Quenya briefly in high school. A couple days later, I was like, well, I'm not getting anywhere on this, and tried to learn Sindarin. A few days later, I was like, well, I'm not getting anywhere on that, and gave up. Tried again in college, still didn't get anywhere. I mean, kept reading and rereading Lord of the Rings multiple times a year. Read the Silmarillion like 4 times in 8 years, and then just started reading it and rereading it in the past like 2 years because for some reason it wound up a really good comfort read. And then I started looking at other stuff, and I came across someone's hypothetical Sindarinized versions of 2 names we only have in Quenya of characters from the Silmarillion, and I was like, that doesn't look right. I don't think that's how you'd Sindarinize those, but I don't know enough about Sindarin or Quenya to know. And 3 hours later, I looked up from a spreadsheet and was like, not sure what happened there, but now I have a spreadsheet with every known name of every member of the House of Finwë I could find, more or less, and a bunch of hypothetical Sindarinizations, which I now think are basically completely, like, just need to be thrown out the window because I did it all wrong because, oh my god, phonetic changes in Sindarin are going to kill me. I love it. But here I am.
All right.
Awesome.
Oh, and otherwise, I also just like language and fiction, got a degree in English, and I have helped out Sarah writing her past panels on the linguistics of the speech from Young Wizards. This is my other major thoughts on Conlang's experience.
This is true. Jenny was very helpful in corralling my cat-like thoughts on the subject. So I guess
Just freeze? Okay.
question, maybe we'll go back the other way, and Jenny, if you have an answer to this, go ahead, and if you don't, you can pass. But if you create fiction, if you write games or anything, why do you make conlangs? And if you don't make them, why not? What do you do instead?
I'm not a writer. I don't have the writing bug that most of my friends and family do. And I've never really cared to develop it because, like, man, I don't have enough time to read all the stuff I want to read and learn all the languages I want to learn that, like, real people speak, let alone people in books. Like, I don't have time for that. Like, if it's not going to come attack me, then I'm not going to seek that out.
That's fair.
I'm just going to be very, very glad other people do.
Marcus, why do you do conlangs?
My brain is weird, but basically, ultimately, it's because my brain is wired towards I must study. It's okay. So, the reason I do it is I like exploring the ideas of grammar, and a grammar and syntax, and which is why I generally don't get around to actually writing the story because I'm too busy developing the language, or drawing the maps.
Big
So the Tolkien problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would get along with Tolkien perfectly.
Nice. Very nice.
But and so that's no, but for like the one I brought today, Shie, basically the reason I do it is because, and keep doing it, is because of the ridiculously complex interaction of the grammar that built up over time, and it's just so much fun to play with the case system and the complex verbs, and which and things happen that I didn't intend, and then I have to figure out what to do with them, or just have the guys in charge say no, that's not the way our language works.
Cool. Kat, what's your take?
Well, I am a writer, and it is a little different for me in that I tend to go to the Conlang tool when I need it. You know, when I'm doing secondary world or indeed, you know, a Portal Fantasy where it makes sense for other languages to be spoken, where it provides a kind of world building. And the thing is that language is so integral to the way that we see ourselves and our culture, even before getting to, you know, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the Darwin of 1970s science fiction. And I am a huge fan of Delaney and Babel 17 and like all of the books that kind of revolved around that. But I really enjoy the ways in which a truly other language can illuminate aspects of a truly other culture and other characters. You know, from pronouns to cases and vocabulary. You know, Greek is actually conceptually a remarkably different language to English. The number of translations would probably lead you to believe that it's fairly easy to translate, and it's truly not. That's why there's so many, because nobody can agree on it. If you were to just, I mean, Marcus knows exactly what I'm talking about. Like, if you were to just ask a panel of classicists to talk about color, the concept of color in ancient Greek, you will run out of time on that panel. Because it is simply not how we conceive of color and how we conceive of the words for colors. And I love all of that. And when you can even just being able to think on that level, when you're creating another world, another culture, any of that sort of thing is an extraordinary, you know, tool in your pocket as a writer. And then I've done it the other way around too, because one of the things that I really, really like is trying to make any conlang that I use sound as plausibly organic, like a language that you could run into, rather than like, well, that's obviously a fake language, Neil Stephenson, but very clever. Like I want to make it sound like something that you could conceivably hear in a pub traveling, rather than something that marks itself out as part of a subgenre, has a million apostrophes, that sort of thing. So I've done it the other way too, where I have many times pulled the wool over people's eyes and made them think a real language is a conlang. I wrote a book called Space Opera. Probably one of the smartest things I did was not create a special language for it. It is inspired by and kind of a parody of Eurovision. And so the names of every alien species, planet, the proper names of any alien, any item from their culture, it all comes from languages from the participating countries of Eurovision. There's about 45 of them. And it's the smartest thing I ever did because it was much easier. But I got to hide a lot of Easter eggs in it. And then only should someone come along who speaks one of them and goes, hey, I know what that is in Dutch, are some of the other ones that do they actually find their way through it? So I've kind of backdoored things that are not conlangs at all. And I think that part of the reason I can play with that is that people kind of expect to find that kind of thing in my work. So they just assume I made it up. And I can seem much smarter than I am.
That is fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, me? Yeah?
Yeah, you.
Cool. My easy, obvious answer is the Marge with the potato meme, which is that they're just neat. That's 80% of why I've always played with it, because I've been lucky enough to mostly engage with them in the construct of play. Part of it is because I really love puzzles and building puzzles, and especially for tabletop games, linguistic puzzles are a really fun way to get people immersed very, very quickly. I really agree. I think with Kat, who said that, you know, it's a way to give the culture as fast as possible, is to, you know, talk about whether their language was largely written, whether it was, you know, spoken, whether it was this, that, the other thing. And I feel like it's a way to make magic very magical too. Which might have come from me reading a certain series of books when I was 13 also. But definitely, you know, structuring when I make props that are supposed to be very magical, there's an air of mystery that I want to give until they puzzle out what that thing is and what it does and why it's there. And you can do that a lot of different ways, but the most low-tech, simplest way to do it is to make the very instruction manual into a puzzle, whether it's printed on the surface or actually a tablet or a literal instruction manual once sitting nearby. It gives people a chance to dig in fast, but lets the aura of the piece sort of speak for itself. So, yeah.
Very cool.
I do think we should say that there is often quite a strong relationship between real languages and conlangs. You know, Tolkien would have been the first to tell you how much he took from Finnish, which is an extraordinary and extraordinarily weird language. And as soon as you hear it or see it written down, you're like, oh, yeah, so that's the Elvish one. Clearly one of the extensions for it. So really, I mean, I do think that the people who are really into this stuff, to the point of knowing the actual, not just throwing a bunch of garbly letters down, but knowing the actual rules behind the language, you're going to find a lot of linguistics dorks, and you're going to find people who speak languages other than English to begin with. And there is always some kind of grandmother tongue that you wrap the tendrils of your new language around.
Absolutely. And actually, you have led beautifully into my next question.
Hey.
Which is when you think about conlangs and natural languages, particularly as you're reading them in someone else's work, like what makes them feel similar or what makes them feel different? Like I know Kat referenced the fact that there are some languages you look at and you go, wow, you key smashed that and called it a word. And like, you know, to someone who doesn't speak this language, whether it's real or fictional, like how you kind of get that feeling of this is a key smash versus this is something with a structure behind it and something that feels organic. I don't know who has thoughts on that.
I can jump in. I don't want to step on anyone's toes since I was the last one to talk.
No, you're good.
Go.
So, you know, this is where just being a huge dork about languages really comes in handy, because if you are familiar with other languages, and I'm not even necessarily talking about being fluent, you know, a couple of weeks of taking French will do you in great stead with this stuff. There are certain diphthongs, which is a combination of more than one vowel, usually just two. And there are consonant combinations that tend to make things look different, or I don't want to say alien, but different to English speakers. So like a double consonant, like, you know, two Ks, if you construct that right, that will look a little strange and different because we don't do it that much, the hard consonants. And there are certain diphthongs that are less common. So when you're thinking about the audience that you're writing for, you want to, you know, pick for your model languages things that are quite different. This is why Finnish works so well, because Finnish is not an Indo-European language. It is an Ugaric language, a Finno-Ugaric language. And they're the only language in the world that is related to it is, drumroll please, Hungarian. God knows why. We really don't. It is one of those great mysteries. And Hungarian and Finnish are both extraordinarily structurally and vocabulary-wise very different to English. And so you can take those little, just, you know, on the letter level, but then you can also take things, you know, if we work our way back from English when we get to the Germanic languages, you talked about key smashing. Well, a lot of those words that look like key smashing in German or the Scandinavian languages, or indeed Finnish, are compounded words. So just the concept of compounding words, including that, and not just not just like we compound words. They'll compound 9 or 11. Like they don't give a fuck. It is just. There is there. Oh, I used to know it. I used to be able to say the word, and now I cannot remember it.
Agglutinative?
No. There's one word in Finnish for whether to consider whether or not to embody the Moomin Mama. I do have it written down on my phone, and I used to be able to peel it off, and it's been too long since I've been to Finland. But even the concept of being able to compound all of that into one word, like, you just take that right into your story, and that says a lot about the culture. That allows really unique word combinations, even if you were to translate them. It allows a lot of really cool stuff. And just knowing that that exists in languages other than English is a really big start to that. So you start by knowing languages other than your own, because it's, much like... I have some weird analogies tonight. The skunk can't smell its own stench. You're too familiar with English. You sort of instinctively know how it works, and unless you've got a degree in English, it's really unlikely that you know how to really get into the weeds on English grammar. And so in order the best way to know what those weeds look like is to study other languages' grammar. So really it all has to start with it. If you want to make it sound organic, you start with something that strikes you as weird from a language that is not your own.
Nice.
Or cool. There's a too, by the way. Greek pulls up words, Katamaris up words like that.
My experience with that, part of the two things. One, it's useful to have some concepts. Like in my culture, for my language, ufu means the ability to consent to commercial transactions, and it's also the word for soul.
Oof.
Which is, so that word says a hell of a lot. A lot about the culture right there. And also, my model for Xie was, at least for the verb, was Sumerian, combined with a little bit of the indigenous structure. The verb structure of Washo, which is an indigenous language, which works almost the same way, but not quite. It's kind of mushed them together and threw out the bits that didn't work. But I stole my original case system from Sumerian, and that was I specifically designed it with the idea that my humans on Mars, because this language is spoken on Mars, were encountering these people, and they were speaking some version of like 22nd century English. And I couldn't think of anything that would be more different than highly agglutinative, slot-based Sumerian. So I specifically designed it to be different and hard for English speakers.
Cool. Fine. I apologize for our new panelist, but he will not be denied. So,
no, cats are very welcome. Is his name Frank, if I recall correctly?
That is correct. This is Frank.
Does Frank have any thoughts about natural sounding cat languages?
He is purring, so I don't know. It's very chill sounding, I think, is where you're going with that. Yeah.
All right. Eljay or Jenny, do you have any thoughts about what makes languages strike you as obviously fake or realistic?
I read a story, and one of you probably knows it, but I can't put my finger on it, about a linguist who goes with some folks to another planet and is asked to construct a language that has all these there's all these rules. It's a little bit Esperanto, where he wants it to be very easily understandable and regular grammar, this, that, and the other thing. But one of the key pieces that they want is stories. that go with it, that are there are reasons for words that have, sort of similar meanings and stuff like that. And in the end of the story, the guy just hands them a Latin book and says, here, you have all of these things, like just do the thing. It's a great story. I wish I could remember it. I want to say it's Connie Willis, but I'm not 100% on that. But that sort of detail has always struck me, is that we have all of these stories about our words, right? Be they real or apocryphal, about where okay comes from and where radar comes from and all this kind of stuff. And to have a story about where a word comes from always anchors it for me and makes it feel real, right? There's got to be, grammar is great. If you can spreadsheet it, it's even better. But having that one weird verb that, conjugates different because once upon a time, et cetera, is what always makes something feel real to me and organic. So, yeah. And I will look up what that story is because it's in one of my books here and post that somewhere so I can share it. But yes.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's an awesome book. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about some of the things that you get in Tolkien where it'll be like, oh, this word was originally this in, some character's name, but it sounded kind of like this other word that also kind of fit. And so over time, it just kind of became the other thing. And now that's what they're called instead. Mm-hmm. And like that's just like, they're elves, but that's just such a human kind of detail. And that's the kind of thing that I always think of, is if there's just something a little bit arbitrary about it, not in the like key smash with apostrophes for flavor way, but sometimes language just kind of happens and it doesn't really have a justification beyond that's just how people said it. That's just what people did with that sentence structure. Like, that's what always feels the most real to me, is it doesn't always have an explanation that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know, I like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Sometimes you're like, oh, I made this beautiful, very systematic and rule-bound thing. And I'm like, have you ever met a human being? That's not what we do. That will last approximately 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I always keep in mind, again, Marcus will know what I'm talking about, that reminds me of that and kind of grounds me in that, is that so a lot of words in Greek end in the letter iota, I. And in Homeric Greek, you see it at the end of words like a normal letter all the time. And then by the time Socrates and Attic Greek rolls around, they've gotten super lazy. And it's just too much work to write the I at the end of any given word where there's a diphthong that includes an I. And so there's an iota subscript, and that's just a little tiny fleck of an I underneath the previous letter in the sentence, because they couldn't be asked to write the goddamn I the word. And like, it's not like video games were invented and they had so much else to do. What are you doing, Socrates? What did you do? But they still were that lazy. So I think about the iota subscript all the time in terms of like the organicness from a language must come from the way people fuck with it. And people always will. I will never stop being disappointed in myself and my fellow science fiction writers who have made careers on predicting future slang, and not a one ever came up with anything as good as yeet. Like, 50 years, no one came up with anything as good as yeet. It's the best. It's so good.
That's, yeah. The thing that kills me about iota subscript is, because I also studied classics, my Greek is atrocious, but the thing that always gets me about that is I'm like, okay, so did they pronounce it though? Like, did they get lazy about writing it? Or they were like, we don't say the sound anymore, but we want to spell it right, so we're going to write it down but tiny. Mm-hmm. Or like,
well, they do. I mean, we have every reason to think that they pronounce the rough breathing mark.
Right.
But for those in the audience, that's H in ancient Greek. Just a little apostrophe that says, go like this. instead of an actual letter, because fuck them H's, I guess.
Mhm.
Something like that.
So
Yeah.
so this is what I mean. This kind of weird thing that we're all talking about, and it's familiar to us because we've studied the language. Like, you have to know people are going to be like that. People are going to be like, oh, whole AH. I'm not doing it.
I know, I can't do it. I'm just gonna do a little
Oh,
tick
Too many lines. Too many lines.
and they're going to take shortcuts. They always
Yeah.
will. There's no chance that any Klingon speaks perfect Klingon except Dork Worf, who cannot stop trying to prove he's the best Klingon in the world or in the galaxy. But anyone other than him, you have to consider how much people will take shortcuts in their, especially in spoken speech. Like if you're writing an ancient prophecy, they're definitely going to do that in the curliest language that they possibly can. But if you're talking about people speaking, they're going to shorthand it. They're going to use slang. And, slang is a conlang.
Mm.
It is in the real world, and it is very much the most common one you'll find in science fiction and fantasy. I did a whole system of slang in a story a couple of years ago called Down and Out in Relaya, where it's all sort of the baby horrors of the old ones living down under the ocean, being millennials, waiting for Cthulhu to get on with it already so that they can move up in the organization. Their parents sitting around being old ones, useless. And so it's like this Kerouacian sort of pub crawl through the Cthulhuid underworld. But their slang, I basically pulled up what are the top 50 most frequently used words by H.P. Lovecraft, and I turned them all into slang. So, like, Eldritch is cool, that's wicked Eldritch, and so every word that he uses way too much is transformed in its meaning into some kind of kid slang, and you will find more constructed slang lexicons than you'll ever find full Tolkien-esque languages. Mm-hmm. But it is a conlang. It's just one that is very alive and changing all the time.
One piece of advice I would give to people developing a language is don't forget the slang, and you need to figure out the the way that your people would verbally give the middle finger to other people.
You got to make the swears.
Bless your heart.
You got to make the swears.
Bless your heart.
There was as a child, before I understood that linguistics was a thing, I would go, every time we went to a bookstore, I would go immediately to the foreign language section, which was inevitably like one French dictionary, one Spanish dictionary, and if I was lucky, one sign language dictionary, and then like a map of how to survive a trip in France. But I distinctly remember picking up an ASL phrase book and flipping through it and trying to learn as much vocabulary as I could before we had to leave, and landing on the page that said, like, swear words. And then the first intro sentence was, "You naughty person, you flipped right here, didn't you?" And I was like, actually, I didn't. But also, that's a good point.
One of my Latin professors just handed out a worksheet on the first day with all the swear words on it. He's like, I'm just going to save you a lot of time. The name of the worksheet was Biggest Dickus. I loved that professor. He was awesome. But he's like, listen, this is what it is. Let's get it out of our system as an icebreaker on day one. What irrimator means. Yes, it's very messed up.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. Speaking of things that give you an incredible idea of the culture too, like how many words are there for dick, right? Like if there's one clinical and one slang, okay, that's fine. If there's 18 slang terms, maybe the culture has some issues that they're working through. Like English, for instance, about these subjects. So it's.
And
don't just make one at a time.
Have sexual swear words, but like Latin has directionality of the penetration. It's words. It's a whole thing.
Oh, I always thought writing fan fiction in Latin would be so much easier because you do have so much more vocabulary to work with. Yeah. Like, there's just a lot you could do there. Maybe that'll finally get me to study it properly.
Oh my God.
I think Filk is where the real possibilities are.
Yes.
A lot. Latin is excellent at rhyming because the endings of the words. And when we've been saying case system, when Marcus and I talk about a case system, that is extremely foreign to English speakers. I actually remember feeling like my brain had broken a little bit the first day I, walked into my freshman Latin and Greek courses and was like, I'm sorry, what? Why? That's hard. Why would you do that? A case system is a language in which the endings of the words determine the function of the word in that sentence. So much like you would have to decline a verb, you also have to decline nouns, only that declination is called cases. Conjugate, it's called declining, and you're declining it into cases instead of verb tenses. So it's a lot. And the good example in English is that to whom thing we all make a big joke about. So that is left over from when English used to have a case system, and that M ending would have told you that it was what's called a dative. And I won't get any more into that, but that's one that's left over in English. And having leftover bits in a language also is extremely realistic. You always have that. But the point is that all those endings are very regular and formulaic in Latin. Oh, I remember what I was talking about. Let's all embrace this moment because it may not come again. All those endings are very formulaic and regular. And so the rhyming possibilities are more or less endless.
It's true.
Nice.
All right, so as predicted, we have spent at least half an hour talking about 3 questions, and this is excellent, and I'm very pleased. So one of the questions that came from folks on the Young Wizards Slack, on the Crossings Slack, so shout out to Mendez if you're in the audience here, we were talking about how conlangs can help develop the cultures of a story, and what are the pros and cons? And I know some of you have already commented on using your language to sort of jumpstart the investigation of a particular culture. And do you have a word for this thing, or do you have 18 words for dick, or do you have whatever? And what are the kinds of claims that you can make or that you see made with they do have a word for this or they don't have a word for this, or the meme that went around the internet for a while about, in French they don't say I miss you, they say whatever. And how do you exploit that in your writing or your creation, or what are your favorite or least favorite things you've seen done with that?
The thing I try to be careful about with that is that all value judgments come from the translator, not the language. And so it's very easy to say the French don't have a word for this, so they don't value it, or these people have 18 words for this. And again, my perfect example of, maybe they have 18 words for, a piece of anatomy. They must be crazy about it. Or there were just 18 different groups of people that came together and formed this language, and they just all happened to keep their word for that, right? I'm making an assumption that because we live in a culture that's obsessed with that kind of stuff, they have more words than we do, so they must be too. It's worth doing, but you have to be careful about absolutes always. That's my big thing. Nothing is obvious. There is the most obvious answer to you. And as long as you're aware that that's the answer you're giving, then, you can get away with anything, honestly, as long as you're thoughtful about how you do it. So, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'd say that the having a word for something, let's take some species we all know about, Klingons. And their hat is a warrior race. But of course, they also have they presumably have doctors and farmers, and they definitely have engineers. But so they're going to have words for those sorts of, just because they have a lot of words that relate to war and battle, doesn't mean they don't have the words for the other things. So I would say that you have to be, if you have a proud warrior race, you should probably be careful to have some words that are not about fighting. Or if you're playing with it, like have the maybe have the farmer in the culture express the whole thing of like sowing the seed, plowing the field as he's in a direct fight with the soil of the planet, like he's fighting the earth, and he's seeing the crop as a victory. But maybe he doesn't see it that way, and you only get to see but the warriors are the ones that everybody sees. So the other aliens get to see, so they don't realize that these farmers think about this completely differently, and maybe even think the warriors are nuts, are the ones who are nuts, and you should just stay right here and, shall we say, tend your cabbages.
Conquer your cabbages, Marcus. Conquer them.
All right, I have to comment on the cabbages because everyone in the audience, and probably Eljay and Jenny, who have no idea what we're laughing at, look up Cato the Elder and just laugh at everything to do with him. Cato. Go look him up.
Okay.
Also, picture in your mind the cabbage man.
And I have to say that, like, I could stand for a Saturday Night Live sketch about Cato the Elder going paleo, and totally would.
Furthermore,
he would totally be one of those bros.
Oh, he would. But also, as you look up everything he did as a politician, just keep in mind the man from Avatar: The Last Airbender yelling, "My cabbages!" and like try to merge those as a single human, and that's what you're looking at.
Not only was he a bad politician, he was a bad man.
But he loved him some cabbage.
Yeah. So as somebody who uses these as a tool, as a means to an end, I think that you have to be very careful not to throw your reader off by using too many new words too quickly, using your magical italics, this is in another language button too often. People, especially in the early stages of the book, people really can get thrown out. And it is okay for coffee to sometimes be coffee, and tea to sometimes be tea, and the ocean to sometimes be the ocean. You really don't need invented words for plain spoken things like that. You want to use them for things for which there is no translation. We don't talk to German people about their word for ocean. We talk about Schadenfreude and all of the other interesting words they have for emotional states that we don't have. So keep in mind that if you're using your conlang as opposed to just presuming that there's some kind of universal translator or some other way in which these people are understood, use it like you mean it. Don't use it for just everyday objects that just add to that count of how many words before the eyes are going to start to glaze over. Use it for things that truly do illuminate the world building, as we've been talking about. And, longer, stanzas and sentences notwithstanding, it's already difficult in a science fiction and fantasy novel to get people to go 50 or 75 pages learning how the world works. That's extra work for a novel that realist readers don't do. And we have the best fans in the world, people who are happy to do that. But if you then throw on, you're going to need to learn 20 new words every couple of pages, that's a lot for people to take in. So you have to keep in mind what learning curve you're asking your audience to take. We didn't really have enough words in Klingon to start constructing anything for quite some time in the grander scheme of Star Trek. So it's something that you need to watch, because it's very easy to get excited about your cool new language toy and want to use it everywhere. But coffee can be coffee. It's okay.
And I mean, I feel like Tolkien is one of the people who always gets brought up as like, oh, I'm just going to throw all of these names at you and you just have to keep the 37 different elves with identical sounding names straight. But at the same time, like, I once saw a joke about how, like, he either has, Frodo Baggins, whose name comes from Old English, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to go into the entire thing, but like, like there's like the 17 different words that he's squishing into the meaning of this and 4 different translations of the name. And then he turns around and calls it Volcano Mount Doom.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's okay to just name it Mount Doom.
Yeah. So effective.
And it's got another name.
Effective.
If you want the name in Cinderin, it's out there. You can look at it. And it more or less translates to Fire Mountain or Burning Mountain or Mountain of Red Flame. So you can just call it Mount Doom. And you don't need the fancy Elvish key smash.
Yeah. And one of the things that Tolkien did so very well, and it is a more subtle thing to keep in mind, is that for English speakers, though there are pronunciation guides and we can all argue over how Galadriel is pronounced, everyone can look at his Elvish words and make a guess as to how to pronounce it. Mm-hmm. And maybe they're right and maybe they're wrong, but they can very, at the speed of an English word, their brain can make a stab at it and say that's how it's pronounced. Yeah. If you are throwing so many crazy spelling things around to make it look, more magical or more alien, and nobody could even begin to guess without like slowly sounding it out and then feeling like they probably didn't get it right, then that is actually an even faster way to yeet your audience out of your book. And that is the great thing, because Finnish words often look like that, and my brain just kind of gives up after a couple of consonants. But he takes those words and reduces them to forms that feel familiar to English. And again, this is where the familiarity with lots of different languages helps a lot. But that, like, every single word, your reader should be able to make a stab in the dark as to how to say that.
And for God's and please, if you're going to use an apostrophe, make it mean something.
Yes.
Were you going to say something else, Eljay?
Oh, I can't. All the stories that I want to cite, and I can't remember who wrote them. I want to say this was Piers Anthony, but it's also a lot of fun to be very clear, to let your reader off the hook in a very clear way. And I remember a very specific scene where, so-and-so's name is whatever, and it's a key smash, and it starts with a double X and it ends with a YJ. And the very next thing is the character staring at him going, how did you make that noise with your mouth? Like, what do you have in there? You can just let them off as gibberish. The name is a nonsense sound to me, but it's the only character with a nonsense sound. So great that I will call them nonsense in my head from here on out. If you can use as much weirdness as you want, if you let your reader off the hook a little bit and give them that sort of mental hook to play with it, they can always go back and, look at the spelling later if it starts to really mean something. So
give them a 50-letter name and then immediately nickname them Fred.
Right. Exactly. Perfect. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So I have a question that I want to end on, but I think we have time for one more before that. So I'm trying to pick which one makes the most sense here. So when you are either creating your own language or choosing an existing language to sort of embody magic in a fantasy setting, what are the considerations that you need for that? Or like, what makes a language feel magical or serve a magical purpose for you?
One of them for me is sort of emotional onomatopoeia. Like my example of this is always the word for wicked in Greek is sketlios, which sounds wicked. It sounds that sounds messed up. That sounds like a terrible species of alien vultures who hate everybody, and also service workers. Like, it just sounds they sound like awful. And so that kind of emotional onomatopoeia, where a word kind of feels like what it is, can be really, really effective, and you're not stuck with the English versions of these words, which sometimes have that sense and sometimes don't.
For me, with someone like Le Guin and Earthsea, I think she did the magic stuff well because it is language based. Because of course it is. It's Le Guin, but but it's not the language that you use every day because otherwise you have to explain why me saying hello to my neighbor doesn't turn him into a toad on a regular basis. It's because even most people aren't magical. Some people are, and what are they going to do every day?
Yeah, for me, when I create magic, I like creating objects and I like creating ritual. And so those are both very visual and there is much about the rhythm and there's much about the rhyme and there's much about the structure of, it can't just be a word for me, right? There has to be a shape to it. And whether that's a literal shape or a phonetic shape or whatever else, it's got to be the combination of the two that work. I was just having this wild conversation with a friend of mine the other night about if you have to have a somatic and a verbal component for your spells, what do deaf people do and how do you cast? And can you make that those two pieces together? Like, is there a separate magical sign language that just wizards learn so you can do them both at the same time? You imbue the somatic component with meaning so it becomes your verbal component at the same time. And so, yeah, this is the kind of stuff that I talk about on a futon at 3 a.m. We got really into it. But again, it's the shape to me, right? It's got to have meaning and movement, or meaning and ritual, or meaning and it looks really pretty painted on a black box in glow-in-the-dark letters, or whatever else. That's what makes it magical, is that extra kick to shape it, I think.
I think you guys covered kind of everything I was going to say. Like, does it have the vibe when I say it in my head? If I say it aloud, is there a rhythm to it? Does it feel like, yeah, I can believe that this does something?
Yeah.
It's about the vibes.
Nice.
Another incredible slang word that I could not have come up if I wanted to is just vibing is the most.
Just vibing.
I love it so much.
All right, so to take us out, either or both of your favorite kind of classic conlang, as in Klingon or Esperanto or Quenya, etc., and or a word you have learned from a conlang, whether it's your favorite or not, that you're like, damn, I wish English had this, and I am just taking it. Eljay, go ahead.
I'm trying to remember the name of the conlang. Of course. The fact that the rainbow has 7 colors and the musical staff has 7 notes got combined into a language that you could either paint or sing, and has to this day moved me deeply. I love it so much. Again, I will look it up. I wish I had any proper nouns in my head today. Apparently I don't. But it's an amazing language, and a lot of people have played with it. And to see a tapestry and a song be the same thing, functionally, meaningfully, has always just killed me in an aesthetic way. So yeah, that one.
Very cool.
Well, I don't really have a choice. I just sold Klingon language rights to a short story of mine. So as there's only one conlang that has ever directly paid me money, it has to go to the Klingons. Kafla. But I will also say that one thing I've always taken, one language I've always taken from that is just stuck with me for so long, particularly with the advent of GIF keyboards, is that in David Brent's Uplift Saga, there is a species called the Timbermee, who a component of their language is while speaking, they can project images above their heads that illuminate what they're saying. It leads to a really beautiful scene at the very end of the saga where this poor human who's been trying to learn how to do it manages to like have a couple little glitter flickies on top of his head of nothing. But as I primarily communicate my emotional state through GIFs these days, I feel that I do in some sense speak Timbermee now.
That's fantastic.
What LJ? I think what you're thinking of is Sol Re Sol.
That sounds very right.
And
for obvious reasons.
So I tend not to borrow words, or at least I run them through a filter first, that they're not recognizable. But one word that I haven't put in a language, but I love, is from Aladdin, which has a lot of words about various emotional states, and my favorite word from there is Aj, which is spelled A with an accent, with an acute accent, AZH, which means the feeling you have for a old fling. You're over them. You're not going to hook up with them again, but you still have some affection for them. And I just thought that was such an awesome word, because when I first read it, it's like, oh, so that's what that is.
Yeah.
I just had that same thought as you defined it. I was like, oh, now I have a name for that.
You're right. It is Sol Re Sol. I pulled it up on Wikipedia while we were talking. That's the one.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Oh, my turn. Okay, if you'd asked me to pick in high school, I would have said Quenya. If you'd asked me to pick in college, I would have said Cinderin. If you try to make me choose between them now, I will cry.
That's okay.
I don't know. They're both so interesting and for slightly different ways. And like either way, my sister's going to kill me for not saying Kuzdul because she cares more about the dwarves and thinks it's just incredibly unfair that either way I have so much more to work with. As for a favorite thing, like a favorite word or something, I had an answer just a minute ago and then I immediately lost it again. What was it? Oh, this is going to kill me. Oh my God. I had something.
If I can quick add something from much more modern things that I all of a sudden popped into my head while you're thinking, Elcor from Mass Effect is one of my favorite things in the whole world. The concept of just tacking how you feel extremely explicitly at the end of every statement. My teenage years would have been so much less confusing if people would just have said, "It's nice to see you, happy," and I would have known that was true. Like,
I haven't even played Mass
conceit.
Effect, and I was thinking about that because I have enough friends who play. I know that's a thing, and I'm so deeply jealous.
Yeah.
So I wrote the last Mass Effect tie-in novel.
Ooh.
Okay, so I have to go play and read this stuff now because that sounds
you actually do. It's
fantastic.
my favorite video game of all time. It is, and the Elcor are the best. I literally, my previous car, the license plate said Elcor.
Amazing.
And in the book, it talks about an Elcor psychiatrist who is trying to spread the Elcor language around, because if everybody would do that, it would just be a lot easier to have like diplomacy and, intimate relationships.
So good.
Like
Listen, I think they're on
language too.
I literally made the happiest sound when I saw the Hamlet production of Elcor being cast in the game.
There's Elcor Macbeth.
Or Macbeth, right. Yeah.
No, it's Hamlet in the game, but it's Macbeth in my book.
Amazing.
To the next logical.
Love it.
Anyway, I think I remembered what I was going to say, which is it's not technically from Tolkien as such. It's from a Tolkien fan site I found when I was like 14 and trying to learn one of his Elvish languages. I don't remember which one. There was, going way back like an hour ago, there was a page of swear words someone had made up or reconstructed. And to this day, I still occasionally, like, just in my head, threaten to throw something in a volcano or wish something would go jump in a volcano. And I definitely stole that wholesale from someone's Neo-Cinderin.
Amazing.
In like 2009.
I love it.
That is fantastic. I'm going to actually answer this last question too, because I think it's a very good question. And I also should, as we wrap up, thank our panelists for their awesome contributions, particularly thanks to Marcus, who helped me write the majority of these questions, and to the people who submitted so many questions that we didn't have time for, because shockingly, asking linguists to talk about words took a while. This is just
plot twist for the ages.
Seriously. But I really love Esperanto, not because it's like a high quality language, not if there is such a thing, but I just love the effort that people went to like, and just that brief glimmer of hope they had that yes, we can create a language that will be universally understandable and it won't change or develop dialects or become confusing. And then they even raised children to speak it natively, and those children were immediately like, fuck you, we'll do what we want with this. And now it is not universally understandable anymore. Shocking.
Because that's how language works.
Exactly. And I think probably the other thing that we didn't actually have time to talk about tonight, but like the places where people don't develop a full-on language, but a piece of a language, or just little bits of vocabulary for the types of things that Kat was saying, where it's like, all right, this is a specific word that really needs a special term for it. I always loved Tamara Pierce's word sati for like the friend who is like basically your family, but not quite. That was the one that came to my mind when Marcus suggested, or someone suggested that question. So many of the closing spiel in just a second. Pej?
I just wanted to let you know that we have moved the event that is supposed to be starting now to a different room, so you are free to continue at this panel if you would like to.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if folks want to keep talking. I feel like we've already kept you here for an hour, so I don't want to compel you to stay. So I think maybe what I will do is I will give our closing spiel, and then anyone who wants to hang around and just chit-chat can do so, and anyone who needs to head off and have dinner or bed or whatever can do that as well. Or you can go watch a movie in Wonderland, which is where they have moved movie night to. So, as always, thank you all for coming. Thanks to our panelists for their insight. Thanks to the audience for being here. We have another day and a half of programming for CrossingsCon Slipping Sideways, so hope to see you around the Gather tomorrow and Sunday. And if you enjoyed this panel, outside in the main entryway, there's stuff on the staff desk where you can buy merch. There's stuff where you can register for next year's in-person convention, which will be in Montreal, and we will get to do all of this again, but in real life, in brick space, as it were. And there's a place to buy us a coffee or subscribe to our Patreon if you are interested in supporting us in that way. I think that's everything I was supposed to say. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.